A shimmering, dazzling expanse of marble. One of the most stunning church towers ever built, grand and elegant. Immortal works of art that transport us to a divine realm. And all this crowned with an architectural masterstroke unsurpassed to this day. Florence Cathedral, a vehicle to express the pride of the citizens of Florence, as well as a monument to their faith. Generations of Florentines participated in its construction, in the knowledge that they would themselves not live to see its completion. They toiled in honor of God and the glory of their city for 170 years. The cathedral radiates a timeless beauty and gives expression to a unique period in the spiritual history of the Occident, a time in which people began to view both God and themselves in a completely new light. And not least, the cathedral is rock-solid proof of the fact that an individual can sometimes achieve the apparently impossible, and thereby usher in a new cultural epoch. In the mid-11th century, Florence went through a major economic and political boom. In the year 1059, the Florentines also began enlarging their baptistry. It became the city's pride and joy. The great poet Dante named it Mio bel San Giovanni, or My Beautiful St. John. With a diameter of 26 meters, the cupola was the largest in medieval Europe. The magnificent mosaics also testify to the city's wealth at the time. In keeping with a tradition of Byzantine icons, they're set against a background of pure gold, a symbol of the glory of God. They display the entire history of the world in 59 tableaux, beginning with the creation. In the center, the figure of Christ with a stigmata, risen from the dead. Beneath him, on Judgment Day, the dead also arise again. But they're divided. On his right, Christ invites the righteous into paradise to eternal life in the sacred fold. On his left, however, Christ shows the back of his hand in a gesture of rejection, and beneath this hand, the sinners burn in hell. These mosaics were created between 1220 and 1290 and still adhere to the style of the Middle Ages. The wool barons wanted to replace the main wooden portal of the baptistry with a bronze door. On Giotto's recommendation, the sculptor Andrea Pisano was awarded the commission, and he created a masterpiece. Pisano subdivided both doors into 28 sections. The lowest sections show the 7 virtues and humility, all of them additionally identified with Gothic inscriptions. The upper 20 sections relate episodes of the life of John the Baptist, the central motif of the entire baptistry. The story begins up on the left, where an archangel informs Zacharias of the birth of his son John. The baptism of Jesus represents the zenith of John's life as his most important task in the story of salvation. That's why Andrea set this particular scene at eye level. And it's a scene that encapsulates the master craftsmanship of its creator. Christ is standing in the Jordan River, and the underwater refraction has been perfectly rendered in the relief. The last panels depict the death of John, which begins with a dance of Salome. As a reward for her performance, she requests the head of the Baptist. The gruesome idea comes from her mother Herodias. John had dared to criticize the queen, and in revenge, she gets his head. Andrea completed these wonderfully vivid doors in the year 1336. 4 years later, he was appointed new chief cathedral architect. Like Giotto, he focused his efforts on the tower. He built 2 further sections and adorned them with rows of relief panels. The cycle begins on the western side with the creation of Adam and Eve. After their expulsion from paradise, humans must earn their bread by the sweat of their own brow. They soon find ways of making life easier. For example, they start to keep animals. According to the Bible, Jabal is the first cattle breeder. His brother Jubal invents music. This was Andrea Pisano's central theme, the creativity of human beings inspired by God. And logically, for the first time, we see depictions of the practical arts here, architecture, for example. This was something quite new. Like all manual work, since antiquity it had been regarded as a lower art form, unworthy of an educated man. But Pisano's reliefs show that people were now becoming more self-assured and that manual work also found recognition. Pisano devotes an individual medallion to the invention of weaving, a nod to the Guild of Wool Magnates, which had after all commissioned the project. In the upper levels, the panels are not octagonal but diamond-shaped. They portray allegories of the planets and on the north side the 7 sacraments, some of them the work of Andrea's assistant Maso di Banco. Pisano's reliefs display a spatial depth similar to that found in paintings by Giotto. So similar, in fact, that some wonder if the designs were not actually the work of Giotto himself. Their new design set down an idea that most likely came to Arnolfo too. To embody the greatness of the city of Florence, a mighty cupola would rise up over the cathedral crossing. The Florentines were very impressed. There was just one problem: no one knew how to build such a cupola. In the year 1401, Pippo Brunelleschi is a grown man. He's completed an apprenticeship as a goldsmith, and this makes him versatile as someone with an appreciation of aesthetic matters as well as knowledge of metalwork and mechanics. He's brimming with self-confidence, and he gets his big chance in yet another competition. The next portal of the baptistry is to be cast in bronze. Filippo submits a design, one that the jury admires with astonishment before rejecting it. The commission is awarded to a colleague of almost the same age, who's also a goldsmith, Lorenzo Ghiberti. The 2 designs are on show today at the Museo del Bargello. They were so superior to all the other submissions that the jury ended up choosing between the 2. Both designs relate the story stipulated by the construction authority. Abraham rides with Isaac to the sacrificial site, ready to sacrifice his own son if it's God's will. At the last moment, however, God stops him and sends a lamb instead. Lorenzo Ghiberti's design appears more balanced, with a coherent group of figures harmoniously integrated into the available space. The scene is divided up along diagonal lines. Down on the left are father and son on their way to the sacrificial site. On the right we see Abraham preparing to sacrifice Isaac. Right at the top, the angel brings him the redemptive lamb. Brunelleschi's figures, on the other hand, appear to want to break free of their confines. He accentuates the drama of the situation. Abraham has already put his knife to Isaac's throat. At the very last moment the angel appears. It's a more modern interpretation of the story, more gripping than that of Ghiberti. Both artists draw on the art of antiquity, which is experiencing a revival at that time. Brunelleschi even incorporates a specific motif. The figure on the bottom left is reminiscent of the famous spinario, or boy with thorn. Although Filippo's design is viewed as the second best, he's deeply insulted by the defeat. This is according to the architect and mathematician Antonio Manetti, later Filippo's friend and successor. He's provided us with the oldest report on the life of Brunelleschi. Not that Lorenzo Ghiberti is just anybody, he's one of the most famous artists in Florence. And the same year, 1425, he celebrates a triumph of his own. He's completed the new doors for the Baptistry, the very commission he once won against Filippo. Just like Andrea Pisano did before, Lorenzo has also subdivided the doors into 28 sections. At the bottom he depicts the Church Fathers and the 4 evangelists. In the 20 sections above those, he relates scenes from the life of Christ, this time from bottom to top. At the start, the Archangel Gabriel announces the birth of Christ to Mary. In the following panel, the Christmas story is portrayed. An angel also appears to the shepherds in the fields. As the storytelling continues, viewers move their gazes steadily skywards. The climax eventually comes right at the top. The Passion of Christ, His crucifixion, the resurrection, and finally the Pentecost. Lorenzo has also included a small portrait of himself. He's now 40 years old and at the pinnacle of his fame. The new doors meet with unanimous admiration. Lorenzo is immediately awarded the commission for the third portal, this time without any need for a contest. Filippo Brunelleschi is not even considered for the job. Filippo doesn't live to see his rival's greatest triumph. He's already been dead for 6 years when Lorenzo Ghiberti completes the last portal for the Baptistry. For 25 years he's worked on the project and created an immortal masterpiece. This time, Lorenzo subdivided the doors into 10 larger sections. He relates several stories within each section, embedded in complex settings. The first panel up on the left shows the creation of Adam, then the creation of Eve. Lorenzo lends an astonishing depth to what are almost flat images. The scene depicting the fall of man, for example, he places in the background. Here not only are the figures smaller, the relief is also flatter, thereby suggesting a rather hazy distance. The expulsion of Adam and Eve from paradise forms the transition to the next section, which shows how humans are now obliged to earn their own living by physical toil. The image of Noah's benediction contains astonishingly realistic renditions of a lion and an elephant, a sensational sight for the people of Florence in the year 1452. The central panels, placed at eye level, have particularly interesting backgrounds. Lorenzo transposes the story of Jacob and Esau, who sells his birthright for a plate of lentils, to a monumental city, and applies with the utmost perfection the rules of perspective developed by Filippo 40 years earlier. Apart from their artistic mastery, the reliefs also contain many political references. For example, the figure of small but victorious David is often used as a symbol of the city of Florence. The famous sculpture by Michelangelo springs to mind. The last scene shows Solomon meeting the Queen of Sheba. This is an allusion to the Council of Florence, where the Catholic and Orthodox churches had reconciled their differences in 1439, a major coup for the Florentines. The success was, however, short-lived, as the schism persists to this day. Lorenzo has again included a self-portrait. He's now over 70 years old. The Gates of Paradise, as they're known, are his most famous and his last work. 3 years later, on December 1st, 1455, Lorenzo Ghiberti also dies. The portal is world famous to this day. Michelangelo himself is said to have cried out at the sight of the doors that they were indeed worthy of their lofty label. But in reality, the name Gates of Paradise probably stems from the fact that the space between the cathedral and the baptistry has always been referred to as paradise. This is where Lorenzo's door finds its place. Andrea Pisano's portal is relocated to the south side, and that is a sensation. Up to now, the main portal showed the life of John the Baptist. That befits the baptistry. With their baptism, people demonstrate their commitment to the gospel of the New Testament. But Lorenzo's portal relates stories from the Old Testament. Actually intended for the side entrance, it now usurps the old doors, and for one single reason, because it's more beautiful. That would have been unthinkable in the Middle Ages, but now the beauty of the work of art and admiration for the artist are more important than the biblical content. A new world view has taken hold. The Renaissance is born. So Lorenzo Ghiberti also found his fame and glory. To this day he's revered as a brilliant sculptor. To this day the cathedral is the spiritual heart of the city. It embodies the unique spirit of Florence. The cathedrals of the Middle Ages were filled with a mystical atmosphere, an expression of the hope of a better life in the afterworld. Florence Cathedral, on the other hand, is filled with light and faces the world head-on. Its greatest work of art is actually a brilliant feat of engineering, and the artworks inside the building also celebrate illustrious people.